Good evening. Thank you for coming. I do appreciate everybody showing up tonight. I know it's in the evening, and I know my accent will make this difficult. I apologize. It's been a problem my whole life. I grew up in New York. Well, maybe I should get my clicker. And when I first went to university, amongst other people who were from the East Coast of the United States, they didn't understand me. They told me to slow down, so I have slowed down over my life to try and make myself more understandable, but all bets are off. A little bit about me. As you heard, I have been a UX professional for 31 years now. I started back in 1991. I have a doctorate in cognitive psychology, and that actually becomes important later. But I have spent my whole career in a combination of both agencies and in-house user experience organizations. I want to talk a little bit about that as well. On the right-hand side, that's me as well. That's what I like to do for fun. So I don't know if that says more about me or more about UX, but UX are dangerous people, so I expect this of all of you. I am happy to talk to folks after the presentation is over. Feel free. I work for a company called NVIDIA. We can talk about that if you'd like. But you can reach me at work, krichardson@nvidia.com, or on LinkedIn. We can talk about UX. We can talk about what it means for you to get into the profession. If you have questions tonight that I haven't been able to answer, and I can almost guarantee that I may not be able to answer all of them, I'm happy to do that offline, so feel free, reach out. This is Louie. Louie is one of our cats. Louie will be our QR code cat for the evening. I have sprinkled QR codes throughout the presentation. They link out to other presentations or websites or papers that I think you will find useful, that are relevant to the topic. If you want to try this out, this one should link you to my LinkedIn profile. And if nothing else, it'll show you what a long career in UX might look like. Okay. So let's start at the beginning. I promised 13 things. I'm actually going to deliver 15 things, but don't tell anybody. We will start at the beginning. Let's talk about how we got here. And for this, I will give you the US perspective, because that's the perspective I have. We began as a profession back in the early 1900s. And our earliest professional ancestors were called efficiency experts. It was from a program of scientific management, and they were concerned with optimizing assembly lines. Think the Model T Ford. How do we get this bunch of parts to be this bunch of cars in the fastest amount of time with the fewest amount of people? That was their job. By the 1940s, the technology changes. Think large pieces of hardware, airplane cockpits, control panel designs for nuclear power plant, coal manufacturing, things like that, mining machines, like big mechanical stuff. And the efficiency experts of the day were not well suited to the design of that equipment. And the group that took its place were the industrial engineers. And the field becomes known as ergonomics. And it's basically the matching of the person to the machine. And this was high stakes work, because you can't design an airplane that requires somebody with 4 arms. They tend to crash. So there was a lot of value placed on this work. By the 1960s, the technology changes again. The move from large pieces of hardware to now software, this thing called software. Now, there was a new group of people required, but they were not required for the design of software. No, the developers who were coding the software at the time, they were perfectly happy. Nobody had any problem with developers designing and developing. No, they needed someone to come in and figure out why people had such a hard time using this new thing called software. It was difficult to use. So what was necessary was someone who knew experimental methods, was someone who knew statistics, and was someone who was used to running experiments with human subjects. That was someone like me. Out of the university, there were these cognitive and experimental psychologists who spent all their days running experiments with intro psych students, Psych 101. So we jumped into this rift, and our job was usability testing. We had no role in design back then. It was built, people have problems, tell me what the problems are. Okay, I could do that. But it quickly became clear, as you can imagine, that if you invited me in just a little bit earlier, I could have helped you avoid those problems. That doesn't happen until much later. The 1990s, early 2000s, there's another shift. Not in technology, but in the breadth of that technology. Now there is the internet, there are web-based applications, there are phone apps, there are games, there are voice user interfaces, and now there is the need for someone to be in control of the design who is not also in control of the development. And that is not me. My background is great for research. I'm not bad at design, but the design that we need here is the design that you can all provide. And that's when we became known as user experience. But because we are rooted in a history of science, we do have standards, we have guidelines, we have best practices, we have rules to follow, like readability. Readability is an easy rule. Right? But for the longest time, designers didn't know that we had it. How do you know somebody can read it? Well, it's big enough on my screen, so everybody should be okay with it, even though my screen is this super high resolution thing, and I'm 23, and the person who's reading it is 67, looking at it on this old monitor on the desk they bought 35 years ago. In order for something to be readable on the screen, it has to be at least 2.33 millimeters tall at the average viewing distance of 500 millimeters, right? We know this because the rules around what people are capable of have not changed over time. People have not changed over time. In the 60s, it needed to be 2.33 millimeters high. In the year 3000, 2.33 millimeters high. We will not evolve to see finer, smaller things. So what that means to designers is, in order to know how tall a letter needs to be on the screen, you need to know how many pixels add up to give you a letter that's that tall. Now, today, we handle this, for the most part, programmatically. We let the application ping the display that's being used to view it, and it decides, do we use this height letter or that height letter or this height letter? But there are still reasons to know this rule because there are still designs that require specific letter sizes. So, learn that rule and rules like it so that you design things that people can use. If you don't, your camera winds up seeing this when you look at your phone, which is the way my mom looks at the phone most of the time. Telling you to follow the rules is great. I can happily stand here and say, all of you guys, follow the rules. But you need to know what the rules are. There are some websites that you can check out in the US. Today, the main website for all of design is digital.gov. It is a little bit difficult to find any specific thing you're looking for. There used to be a website called usability.gov, which they don't update anymore, but is still active. If you're going to go look at one of the US sites, look at usability.gov. Here in Uruguay, we have Gub.ui. I won't take credit for that. But these two subsites off there are really very good, and the form design one, on the bottom right by the picture of Louis, is excellent. Look at it, use it, memorize it. It will help you. Knowing the rule is fine, but you need to know how and when to apply the rule, and probably more importantly, when not to apply the rule. This class you should sign up for, you should take, speak to Professor Richero. It is excellent. I looked at the syllabus. Don't bother, I saw the slides from before, right? People in general look at Coursera and Google and a bunch of the other online certification classes. If I had to give you a piece of advice, and this whole evening will be about me giving you pieces of advice, so ignore it if you like, but don't bother with those. The Nielsen Norman class, any of that stuff, Jared Spool, forget it. They're not accredited, they're not recognized. Experienced professionals like myself don't care about them. Take something offered by the university. For the price, this is outstanding. You can't get this in the United States. Truly, I made a slide just for this when I found out about it because I think it's that worth your while. I want to talk a little bit about process because we do have, a process, and it generally looks like this. You'll see it represented in different ways, but there are three things about it that should be common whenever you're looking at it. There are phases: research, design, testing, development. There are usually some set of deliverables in the research phase. Something that we create is this requirements definition or a strategy document. And then down here on the bottom, this is not just because it looks nice and fills up the blank space that was there. The colors match to the top. If you notice, individuals will be responsible primarily, usually for one or two of these things, not everything. Researchers will work with designers, will work with developers. All of them are responsible for different aspects, but they all work together over time. They may be primarily responsible for one and not really much responsible at all for another, but everyone works together all the time. Collaboration is what makes UX different. This is not our process. This is a development process, and in fact, it's a fad. Do we know the word fad? Okay, good, because this will be replaced. Nobody should get attached to this. The design process has been used since the first cave person made the first pointy rock to fit on the end of a stick. They used design. They didn't know it. This replaced waterfall. Something will replace this. So don't get too attached to figuring out how should we fit into the development process. The development process, between us, should fit around ours. Our process has been around a lot longer and works. Thank you. Okay. Because there was a book up there that said Lean UX. I've spoken to the author about that at a conference once. He and I have very different beliefs about UX. I get a lot of questions about portfolios. Totally understandable. Between your resume and your portfolio, it is the way the hiring manager gets to know you before they think they should pick up the phone and say hello. So there are questions. How many examples should I have? Should I have mobile? What if I'm a researcher and I don't really have much in the way of nice-looking examples? Well, I'm going to give you the simple answer, and then I'll explain it. The simple answer is demonstrate that you understand that process. When I look at a portfolio, I care a little bit, if you're a designer, that you have a decent aesthetic. but I care a whole lot more if you understand what the process is and your role in that process. So, if you're a researcher, show me that you can come up with multiple methods to try and understand the nature of a problem. Show me that you can analyze data and provide to me actionable recommendations with sketches to show me what that might look like. If you're a designer, show me that you can come up with multiple designs to support the same interaction model and be able to explain to me why they're good and bad. Why should we care about one or the other? Just showing me several is great, but don't just show me what you can do, show me why you've done it. I always ask this question at the end of an interview: what's the difference between designing business software and designing a house? And I didn't realize how appropriate this would be in the School of Architecture. But before anybody spends too many gray cells trying to figure this out, there is no difference. This is a trick question to see if the person I'm speaking to understands process. Architects follow the same process we do, right? We have to figure out what somebody needs, what their problems are, what are they trying to solve. The only difference between what we do and what architects do is we design in electrons and build for a screen, and they use actual materials. It's a small difference in software, and it's a small difference in hardware. But basically, it's the same. And in truth, I have found architects make great UX people. Any architects here? All right. I get free drinks from the architects tonight. When people come to me from either school or other jobs, they have not been taught how to estimate their work. Think back to the previous, when I talked about the process, right? There are deliverables that we have to create at each stage in the design process. If you can't tell your manager, your colleagues, your clients how long something's going to take for you to finish, they will tell you how long it's going to take to finish. So it will serve you well in the future to try and do this. And what I would suggest is see your work through the lens of the typical tasks that we do. I just wrote some of them, right? If you have a new project, you have to spend some time reviewing it to see what it's about. You have to spend some time doing the research, some time analyzing the data from the research, design, validation, right? You know the story. In the beginning, guess. I guarantee you your guesses will be way off. But put it down in a spreadsheet. Put the tasks, put a column for estimate, put a column for actual. Every project. This is going to take 40 hours, 80 hours, 120 hours, right? Whatever you think. As you're working, keep track of your time. Very important. When you're finished, go back, write it down. I guarantee you it will be this gulf. But as you do it over time, your estimates and your actuals will get closer together until you reach a point where you'll be able to estimate within the hour how long something's going to take you, and that capability will span different project types, because not every project will take you, 40 hours of research. One may take you 8. One may take you a month. You'll be able to figure that out. That will be very useful. I am always asked, should I work in the agencies or should I work in a UX group in-house? It is not a straightforward question because there are positives and negatives to both, and they depend in part upon your personal situation, what's available. But because I promised, when I'm done, I will give you my answer. If you choose to work for an agency, there are a number of very important positives. You will become experienced across a large number of business problems, a large number of business types in a very short period of time. The nature of being a consultant is you do your job, then you move to the next job, then you move to the next job. As a consultant, you may find yourself with 4 different projects in a year. It could be 12 different projects in a year. It will give you a broad set of expertise, and almost as importantly, at the agency, there are almost certainly a large number of other more experienced UX people who are there to support you as you hone your craft. That you should not underestimate. If you are junior or mid-level, you want to be someplace where you can continue to learn. Now, on the flip side, working for a consultant means long hours. It means very stressful. And you would think, oh, stressful, you know, I'm doing a lot of projects, very stressful. It means going to clients, being professional, but not knowing what they do. But very quickly, you have to become kind of like an expert in what they do in order to understand what they need. And if you had to do that once in your career, okay, you could spend a month, 6 months, 5 years getting to know what a company does. But you have to do this maybe once a month, every month. It does grind you down. On the negative side, you are also not likely to ever see your work developed and released into the wild, which can be a bummer, because you just spent all this time and effort designing the perfect thing, and then you leave. They may do it 6 months to develop it, a year to develop it, more than a year to develop it, but you're long gone by then. And that doesn't sound like much, but after a while, that kind of gets on your nerves. On the other side, you can work, for an in-house UX organization. This is my company, NVIDIA. I am their in-house UX organization. So when I said there would not be many other people to collaborate with, I am, in the whole company, the only one. And before me, there was no one. That's why I worked with that previous agency called Kraft. There are pluses and minuses here too, right? Because you're an employee, you stick around for a long time, you will see the work that you designed become real. You will see people use it, you will have a chance to go out there and talk to them when you're using it and improve it. The hours are typically much more normal. You tend to work a normal day. You can go home at the end of the day. Nobody's telling you you have to finish this thing before 9 a.m. the next morning. But what you tend to wind up with is very detailed knowledge in a very narrow set of business problems. Whereas at the agency, I know this method works well here, that method works well here, that method works well there. When I work in-house, there is a limited number of problems to be solved. There may even be libraries of components that have been agreed upon that you have to use, so the freedom to explore may not be there. So, do you work at an agency? Do you work in-house? All things being equal, especially if you're junior or mid-level, work at an agency. Working here, all other things aside, will allow you to gain much more experience in a much shorter period of time with a group of people who are there to support you. You are not alone. Now, are there agencies where it's like 3 people? Sure. Don't go there. Especially if you're trying to learn, you want there to be, mid-level senior managers who are UX people with many years of experience. You want all of those people on your side. The other thing I see when people come out of university is that they have not been trained, and this is going to sound bad, so I apologize, but they have not been trained to work well with others. Their experience comes from being with other UX people, and the world outside includes many more than just UX people. Developers are the first group. Truly, this sounds funny, but you make their lives hard. Because your let me rephrase. Your design is going to be difficult for them to code. Just accept that. Because without you, they would have designed something that was easier for them to code, right? They're building it. Of course, I would build something that I would have no problem building. Do they both accomplish the same thing? Maybe. So you need to understand that your role in this situation is to explain to them why your more difficult to code design is better than their easier to code design. And you can't simply say, because I'm the UX person. There will be temptation to do that. You can't. You need rationale that says, I chose this because I chose that. And here's my rationale to explain how I arrived at this solution. And it needs to be grounded in science. Remember, our profession is grounded in science. We have principles, guidelines, standards, best practices. Right? These are there for a reason, and you need to understand them so that you could explain the decisions that you make. There's also another group of people who make your life difficult. It's only fair. And these are clients, bosses, colleagues sometimes, who ask you why. Why? That simple word will be the bane of your existence. Bane of your existence? Not a good thing. It will make your life terrible. Like wolfbane, werewolf. Oh, that. You will get people who say, why did you use this color? Why this font in this size? Why did you put this form in this layout? Why is the submit button on the right-hand side of the screen as opposed to on the left-hand side of the screen? And they will probably say, I saw it done that way. Why don't we do it that way? Similar to what you have to talk to the developers about, you need to explain your rationale for these design decisions because you are the expert, which means that you are responsible for having a rationale. They can disagree with the end product, but they should never be able to disagree with your rationale that led you to that product. So if you put the button on the right-hand side as opposed to the left-hand side, and I use this specifically because it used to be kind of a religious debate. Microsoft would always put the submit button on the left and the cancel button on the right. Apple always put the submit button on the right and the cancel button on the left. Which do you pick? I pick the Apple way. Because I'm an Apple guy? No. Although I am, but not for that reason. My rationale is because for us in Western cultures, when it is a task, we are moving that task forward. And for us, that follows from left to right. So for me, you put the submit button on the right because the right-hand side is where I am moving to the next stage in the process. Can somebody say, well, that makes sense, put it on the left? They could, but they can't argue with my rationale for why I've done it. And at some point, they stop arguing with you, so that's good. A number of years ago, I wrote an article called The One Rule of UX Consulting. And in truth, I probably should have called it The One Rule of UX, but I was a consultant at the time, so it made sense. In this article, I try and make the case that because you are the expert, it is your responsibility to make your rationale clear to your audience. And if that audience does not understand your rationale, not disagree with it, not understand it, then you are responsible, not them. The person you're describing what you've done is not responsible for understanding you. You are responsible for getting them to the point of understanding. It is not a rule that has found universal acceptance, but I find it makes better consultants. And there's Louis again. A quick word to the UX researchers. Can I get a show of hands if you identify as being primarily responsible for research tasks? No, I'm the only one. 3 of us. Oh, I'm not telling you then. All right, for everybody else who is a designer, a show of hands for the people who have to make decisions about what the nature of the problem being solved by the design is. Which means, did you have to go do some research? Thank you. For a second, I thought nobody was doing research, and if you're not doing research, you're just making stuff up. For like the 3 of us who are researchers, we tend to come from a background where we are taught to work alone and to come up with the answer, and then we simply show you the answer, we expect applause, and then we walk away. This was my academic background, and it is still the background of people who come from my sort of academic world. And it does not work in user experience. As you may remember from that picture of the process where everybody was collaborating, there is no point in our process where individuals work alone, do a thing, hand it to somebody else, and walk away. Does not happen ever. Oh, a question in the middle, sure. They are, yes, that's exactly right. You cannot separate them, so I apologize if it's making it sound like you can. But there are individuals who are primarily responsible for different parts of the process. I am not a visual designer, right? I can do a little bit, I can sketch out the way I think something should look and the way it should work. But my strength is in the research, in the methods, in collecting data, in analyzing and saying, these are the problems I think we need to solve. I did not go out there by myself. The person who was doing the visual design would have come with me. So they could have heard the same things I heard, but their strength may be in taking the problem and then putting a form to the solution. So if the problem is X, we could allow them to solve that problem by doing this screen with this stuff laid out this way, or this data visualization over here. I am not great at that stuff, and I know it, because that's just who I am. So for us, the people like me, there is no time when I go out by myself to do my work, but I should not have the expectation, even if there are researchers and developers with me, that I am going to do a thing, give them my report, and then walk away. No, no. I may be responsible for writing up the analysis of the data, simply because somebody has to push the mouse around. But we work on these things together. That brings me to a good point. When you go out into the field, what sorts of things should you be looking at? And I want to talk about 3. The simplest question you should ask when you go out there is the application usable? And let me take a step back for a moment. Most of my career has been spent doing work centering around business software, enterprise software, big stuff that people have to use 8 hours a day. So when I go out, it's usually because somebody has asked me, we're going to replace this, or we want to improve this, or there are some problems with this, can you go help us? A very broad statement. Sure. So the first thing, is it usable? The nice thing about this question is you don't need users to know if a thing is usable. And users are a pain. If you can avoid users, our life gets so much easier. Here we're looking at heuristic evaluations. We're looking at best practices, standards, guidelines. I don't need a user to know whether or not the font is 2.33 millimeters high. If it's not that tall, I know people can't use it. I know it's not usable. I can tell without a person sitting there if the contrast ratio is high enough, or if the form is aligned correctly. I can do that simply based on following a heuristic analysis. That's what heuristic analysis do. Right? They allow me with a checklist, basically, to go through and say, does it do this? Yes, no, this, yes, no, this, yes, no. And at the end, depending upon the heuristic you're using, you could give it a score and say, yep, usable, no, not usable, kind of usable, but needs help. People have been using this since Nielsen, Norman, those guys. And in fact, even though I have written my own, it turned out it's not too far away from Nielsen. Norman have their own. I'm not a big fan of Nielsen. Big fan of Norman. Not a big fan of Nielsen. Norman, actually, in case you're interested in a little history, comes out of an experimental psychology program, too. But this is a really good one. Take this, read it, use it, memorize it. This is the easy part of the work that we do. It's going to seem like a lot of detail in the beginning, but I swear to you, this is the sort of stuff that you should and will be doing in your sleep. It will take no effort once you get used to this. Next step, right? You've taken care of that. I know, usable, easy. Walk into a room, not usable. Now you have to know whether or not a thing is useful. This is what we're typically hired to do or asked to do. And this is a combination of tactical and strategic work. This requires the person. Because to know if something is useful, I need to know if it's solving the problems that they have. Where are they having difficulties? Where are they working around the system? For this, you should be thinking contextual inquiries. You should be thinking mental models, interaction models. You should be drawing mental maps on the wall, right? Where is the data coming from? Where is it leaving? What is it going into next, right? What is this piece of software in the big frame of things? And if you can do this, by definition, it means you can do the usable thing as well. And typically, this is all anybody ever cares that we do. If we're hired and you can go in there and make their thing more useful, great. Everybody will go home happy. You'll go home happy, your boss is happy, the client's happy. But it's not all that we can do. Once you get good at this, then you can move on to look at the broader information ecosystem. The user-application pair do not exist in isolation. They exist within a broader framework of stuff, right? They do not sit in a small room by themselves. There is information from other devices, other documentation, other people, other processes. Even the physical environment itself can play a role in the design of the application you were asked to design. No client is bringing you in to say, I need you to fix this thing that, Joe here is working on. They're not thinking you're going to go, oh, let's see the building where he works. Let's talk to the people he works with. Let's see the documentation. They don't think any of that has anything to do with their request, but it does. If you have enough attention at some point in your career to spare to looking at all of these other things as well, this is where innovation happens in your design. You will find out things that nobody knew was a problem until you showed them how much of a problem it is. And you can fix that in the design of this application. This is what happens when people go, wow, I never thought of doing something like that before. And it's because you looked a little bit further outside that thing you were asked to do. Okay. It has been a lot so far, but we're almost at the end, so stick with me. Dashboards are very important to businesses. If you have never been asked to be involved in the design of a dashboard, you will. Count on it. But even though they're very, very important, they are almost invariably designed very, very poorly. This comes from Apple. My watch tells me how long I slept. Cool, it's pretty. I like the colors, I like the rounded edges on the shapes and stuff. But what does it mean? Did I have a good night's sleep? Did I have a bad night's sleep? Did I dream too much? I don't know, right? I don't know what I should do with this. It looks good, but should I try and have more deep sleep? Can I have more deep sleep? I have no idea what to do with this. Also, what happened to the missing hour and a half? Presumably, those little red lines across the top where it says awake, that adds up to an hour and a half, but you wouldn't know it by looking at this, which means that the design, the data visualization for the amount of time spent in each stage breaks down when you're talking about small times that visually you need to add together. Because when I look at those orange lines at the top, I don't think, I was awake for an hour and a half last night? That doesn't seem possible. So I'm not sure. I haven't taken the time to cut and paste them together to see if they add to an hour and a half. No, awake 10 minutes? Yes, you're right. Oh my God, how did I not guess that? How bad is this a design? This is not the first time I've given this talk, and you're the first one to catch that. So Apple is stealing time from you every night, and they won't tell you why, but they will tell you they did it. This is a typical dashboard that I took when I was visiting a client, I don't know, 6 months ago, and it's not unusual. It's a lot of data. And the problem with a lot of data is that data is not meaningful. Dashboards that show all of the numbers rely on people to impose meaning on it, right? This number, 90%, that looks like it's probably good, but I don't know. Just like my sleep app, I don't know what it means because this dashboard doesn't take into consideration the job I'm doing, the questions I'm asking, or the context of the situation in which I'm asking them. So they leave it to you. The data's all there, just, go look at it. Cool, but I have to now spend time thinking, all right, if this number is 90 and that number is 138 and that number is 93, those three things together should tell me, grab my keys and drive away as fast as I can. I don't know, what's good, what's bad. This is the answer to all of the problems that anybody might have if only they understood. In order for a dashboard to have been designed well, it needs to provide meaning. It needs to provide information. It needs to tell a story. The best dashboards answer the user's questions within the context they're asking because we know what questions they're asking. We did the research to find out when you look at this dashboard full of crazy numbers, what is it you're really trying to define here? What is this telling you? And they will give you the formula that they use in their heads, the mental gymnastics, to go, well, if this is this number and it's steady, but this number is falling over time and this number is rising over time, that tells me that I should, go do a thing, check a machine, go look at a file, right? Whatever. If we know those questions beforehand, we can design a dashboard that directly answers them. That's the key to a good design. If you want to know how bad a design is, ask how long does it take to become proficient using this thing? How much time training until you are just barely adequate at your job? The numbers will astound you, and they are taken as normal by industry, which is why we need to be there all the time. I have been in situations where when you ask that question, the answer is 6 months. It takes me 6 months to get good at my job because of the software that I am forced to use for my job. How can you live like that? If you can't come up with a design that allows people to immediately answer the questions they need answered, like in the first 30 seconds, then we're not doing our jobs. But you can see how low the bar is. Any improvement you can make over 6 months is great. This next one is where I give you a couple of free ones, but it's also the one that I like the most because it is the most controversial. These 3 things, people, if they haven't already told you, you will hear, and people will talk about them as if they are the absolute truth straight from God. They are not. The first, fail early, fail often. This just hurts. It's actually probably the unofficial slogan of Google, because Google doesn't do research, they do design sprints where everybody just comes in and makes stuff up for a while. Sorry, Google. But if you remember the process starts with research. We are research-informed design, science-based. When you do your research, if you have talked to enough people, your design should solve 80% of the problems correctly, right? I make you that promise. If you do the research correctly, your design will be 80% correct the moment you let out the door. Will you have to tweak it? Sure. You didn't speak to everybody. There are users you never spoke to. There are problems you never heard of because the people you spoke to didn't have those problems. That's fine, right? 20%, easy. But this is absurd. Nobody would ever hire you. If they said, all right, we're going to bring you in for an hourly wage, when will you be done? And you'll go, I don't know, but I'm going to fail a lot. And my very first one, you can count on being a failure, but you can pay me up front. Good designers code. I see this a lot now. And I want to make sure that I'm clear. It is not that you should not understand the process of coding, understand the difficulties that go into development, understand the mindset of your development organization, even have some sense of how difficult a particular design might be to code. But if you are the designer, do not also be the one responsible for the code. And I say that because if you are, you will only design within the limitations of your ability to code. I will say it again. If you design, you will only design within the abilities, within your ability to code, because why would you create a design that you can't build? You wouldn't, of course not. It would be stupid. Is your design the best design possible? Maybe. But I would suggest to you that it is enough to be the expert in what you do and let developers be the experts in what they do. Just like it's nice to have researchers around like me, even though there's only a few of us. And then this last one, UX requires empathy. This one always gets the most discussion, and for that reason, I have given it its own slide. Let me explain. First, empathy in our context means designing because of your ability to experience the world through the eyes of others, walking a mile in their shoes, if that expression makes sense. Empathy is not an objective research method. Remember, research-based design, science. If I base my design on your empathy with our users, will someone else create a similar design based on their empathy with the same users? Probably not. Also, the key to user experience is that we are not the user. And let's go back to the notion that you can empathize as a research method. Okay, let's stick with that for a second. Can you empathize equally with all users? And let's just say your users are people who are buying shoes online. Well, maybe you can empathize with them. Okay. What if it's a neurosurgeon or a pilot or a network engineer, and you're designing some sort of aid for them in the cockpit, in the emergency room, in the IT center, right? Empathy there doesn't serve to uncover the problems that need to be solved through the use of technology. But the research that we employ in the beginning of our process does. There used to be a phrase back when people like me were responsible for the design, because the actual designers were still unfortunately working in marketing departments and had yet to kick us out. And they kicked us out not soon enough. But we used to describe our ability to design as, well, you know, we come from a psychology background. We're people persons. And we said that with a straight face. It's absurd. You can't design for everybody because you're a people person. People have different problems. I don't know them. I have nothing in common with a heart surgeon. If you decided that you could design based on your ability to be empathetic, okay, but can you design equally for everyone? Can you be equally empathetic with the person buying shoes and the heart surgeon? I would argue that you can't. And based on that, it means that you can design better for some people than others. That's not the profession we're in. We can design for anybody because we have the tools at our disposal to understand what the nature of their problems are. I don't have to be a heart surgeon, but I can understand what their problems are through my contextual inquiries and my observational techniques, right? Easy. Okay. Deep breath. For me, not you. There's only a couple of more points I want to make. And you will find that while you are working, there are times when you're very busy, and there are times that you're not. Even the busiest consultant is not busy all the time. There are down times between projects. While you are working, thoughts will occur to you. Oh, this is an interesting problem. I wonder why this is. Oh, that's an interesting research method. I didn't realize it would help me understand that. Oh, that was pretty cool. When these things come to you, you won't have time to spend much exploring them, but write those ideas down. Keep a specific Word document, a specific note, and just label it ideas. Write it down, a phrase, a sentence, enough so that you can go back to it and understand what you meant. When you get to these quiet periods, pull that document out. Find a topic that's interesting. You will probably still have thought about it. It'll rattle around in your brain while you're working. Write a sentence. Write a paragraph. Write 2 paragraphs, a page, right? Whatever you think is meaningful about this topic. Reread it, make some edits, give it to a colleague. They should do this too, so that they can critique it. Take this, make it into something that you can present at a meetup or conference. I know there need to be more of them. This is why you need to go and do this, right? Presenting, first, writing helps you think through the nature of the problem. Presenting allows you experience thinking on your feet. It requires you to have thought deeply about a topic, and it requires you to be able to answer questions on the fly. Not all of which happen at the end. Thank you very much. But don't simply take that time and go, all right, well, nobody has given me something to do, so I'm just going to wait. This is when you take care of this other part of your education. And then finally, In UX, there is perfection. It is not something simply that we can strive for. It is something that we can achieve. There are times when you can create the perfect solution, the perfect interaction model, the perfect design that allows the user to solve a problem in such a simple and beautiful way that it will make you want to cry. When this happens, and I guarantee you it will happen, you will know it. Your colleagues, your peers, your boss, they will all know it. Like a disturbance in the forest, I may even know it. But when this happens, I need you to keep asking questions, to keep honing your craft, because the future of UX is not me. I am the past of UX. I can tell you how we used to do things and how we're doing things now. But the future of UX is yours in this room, and it's your job to move our profession forward. Thank you for staying with me tonight. Do we have time? Questions? Oh, thank you. Anybody? Yes, here in the front.
Earlier you mentioned that you really weren't in favor of the Lean UX approach. Interested in hearing.
Yeah, Lean UX, I'm with you. Lean UX, by its very title, suggests that we're trying to shoehorn the design process into the development process. And I have been part of it too. And oftentimes we don't have a choice, right? The world is centered around delivering the product, and the product is code. So how can we help the product? And when you get to a certain point in your career, you may be able to say, well, you know what? And using Agile as an example, we're going to do a really long sprint zero. What is sprint zero? Sprint zero means you leave me alone, and I will tell you what the problems are and what this thing is going to look like when we're done. Done, done, done. From that, we know what we're working towards. This is at the end of sprint N. We can also, since we know what it's going to look like by the time we're finished, be able to scale that back to see, okay, but we're going to deliver this in sprint 1, and we understand how it relates to what we're going to deliver next in sprint 2, and how that relates to 3 and 4 and 5 and eventually N. Am I trying to get involved in the individual sprint level? No, I'm doing my best not to, because those questions tend to be very, very tactical. What do we do for this? Well, if I knew what we were going to do 9 sprints from now, I'd have a way better answer for you than this in isolation. Well, put the button there. Why? I don't know, it works. You know, whatever. If I knew what we were going to deliver eventually, I would say, no, don't put a button there at all. What we need is something entirely different at this point, right? We should be doing maybe a dashboard first, leave the application until later, or the troubleshooting paths, or the way you dive into details. I understand sprint, actually, and I started UX when we were doing waterfall. So I get the problems with that. There are problems with sprint as well. I don't expect any better from whatever the thing is that takes the place of sprint, of Agile. But I do know that if UX is given the freedom to understand the nature of the problems to be solved by the product, that we can do a much better job of dividing up that product into deliverable sprints. But it does Other? One question? We don't have reservations until 9. Anybody from the cheap seats? You guys get here late? Down here.
Puede preguntar en español, si nos anima y se traduce la pregunta.
I have a question.
I have the gentleman in the white shirt back here.
Mine is a little bit long. I'm going to start philosophical and then pragmatic because I'm on a mission kind of here. So I think as a society last 100 years, you started with four. I think we've done.
Oh, yeah, if I don't have a microphone, you don't.
I think we've done a very poor job as a society to create very efficient environments for everything we do. Right? Cities or square grids of gray blocks of concrete. Workplaces are just gray, again, boxes of just sad people just pressing buttons, going through the motions, right? So I think, and here's where you asked him saying, I think there's a very good opportunity to create much more life-like environments for us to thrive, right? Some cities, particularly in Europe, are changing the trend, removing highways, replacing with parks and better urban designs. But I would love to bring that to the workplace, right? Designing more like full of life workplaces where things can get done, but people are still happy about it, right?
And I have seen that. Is this? Yes. There are workplaces like that. What's required for that is the same as what's required for the design of a city, or buildings, or bike lanes, or whatever. It's an agreement on the nature of the problem that is problematic, because we can all agree, okay, I need a better work environment to be happier, because if I'm happier, I will produce more. Well, do you have evidence of that? Somebody's going to ask, because some owner of a company is going to want to know, how much money do I have to spend to go from my half-wall cubicles to big open spaces that are now very noisy, by the way. And that's not even considering pandemic where everybody works from home anyway. But getting to agree the nature of the problem is difficult because there are different vested interests in the solutions. In an ideal world, we would say, yes, we should have less pollution. There should be more bikes. There should be more incentives to not use cars, to use public transportation. We should have greener buildings and greener cities, right? Would you argue with that? No. But if there are people whose interests are not totally in line with the solution then that requires, then it makes the problem difficult. And I think you're certainly much more able to see nice work environments, even in the United States, where there is very little appetite for green buildings or bike lanes or public transportation, because it's a much more focused problem. And if you own the building as the owner of the company, you can rationalize it and say, well, they're going to work better, which is more money for me. Are they doing it for you? No. I wish they were, but no. Do you want to be more philosophical, or should I move to the lady in front?
I need to specifically to motivational psychology apply to a workplace where the UX practice and UX design can help me develop that kind of workplace.
I don't have anything in mind, but write to me, and I will talk about it with you. I have some ideas, but it's going to require some thought. Yeah, cool.
Why is it so hard for engineers to understand and trust in the design process?
It's actually a very deep question. And I do have an answer. And by engineers, you're talking about the people who were formerly responsible for both the design and the creation of the thing. Like if you went back in my picture of the timeline, if you went back to the airplane cockpits, it would be the industrial engineers. There are two reasons, I think, and I'm not going to put a percentage to which accounts for more of the problem. But one of the problems is that you are taking away responsibility that they formerly had and felt was fine and rightfully theirs. So I am responsible for designing and building these airplane cockpits, excuse me, or the code, and if there are problems, well, my design is fine, right? If you ask anybody, down to whoever designed the Chernobyl, nuclear power plant, it wasn't the design's problem, it was a person. The original developers who were doing software, there was no problem with the design of the code, the screens were good, it was a people problem, right? Just fix the people. And in fact, you can see evidence of that, I'm just not making this up, because of that rationale, and everybody agreed with it, huge amounts of money went into training programs. You would get sent off to training, still do, right? I'm 1 week I'm out at training, 2 weeks I'm out at training to learn how to use this program. It still happens. Is it a problem with the design? Of course it's a problem with the design. But it's my design, and I feel very protective of it. So I think it's those things. It's proprietariness. Not sure that's an English word, but I built this, it's my baby, and I have made good things in the past, so I will continue to make good things in the future, when in fact, you've never really made good things. But it wasn't until people like us who came along and said, no, trust me, I'll do it for you. And now, right, even coming into the company where I am now, there had never been a UX person. I'm using the term, but the company before I got there had used a contractor once to do a design, and everybody liked it except the person in charge of development, so they said, no, we're not going to do it. And it literally sat on a shelf. When I joined, it was on a shelf, the design, in a big rolled up tube. I have it in my office now, it's a souvenir. I'm sorry, I forgot even where I was going with this. Oh, because even today, right, all those things I told you have to do about explaining the rationale, I had to do. 31 years. And I'm still explaining to developers why the breadcrumb trail has to be the way it is, why the forms need to be laid out. I'm still telling some designers why numeric values need to be right aligned and not center. Come on. Other. Yeah. Nope, you. Right. Yeah.
Do you suggest pursuing a postgraduate in human-computer interaction or something similar to someone that comes from graphic design or some similar discipline? Considering the survey.
Yep. Yes, absolutely I would. Our field, as we move into the future, by necessity, means the people in it will have a much broader experience at the undergraduate level. There will be content writers, there will be graphic designers, there will be architects, there will be sociologists. I'm surprised sociology scored so low. In the US, in the beginning, it was all psychologists and sociologists. We were the only UX people. And in fact, I'll come back to your point in just a second. My original job title was Human Factors Engineer. Why? I'm not an engineer. The reason is we were hired into engineering organizations, and their organizational charts only had engineering spots. So they had to make up an engineering title for people like me, Human Factors Engineer. And to make it worse, for a very brief but embarrassing period of time, they shortened it, and I was known as a HEFI. I was introduced in a hallway. Oh, this is Kevin, he's our HEFI. Even then it sounded stupid. But yes, so because now there is so much more to design, it requires people from a broader spectrum of educational backgrounds. But it still requires us all to have the same fundamental UX knowledge, an understanding of the standards and the guidelines and the best practices that have been around, not because they were specific to a technology, technologies change, but because they're specific to people, and people don't change. We know the best alignment because we've tested how quickly people's eyes move down the screen when they don't have to go like this. So yes, it is important that we come from a diverse background because that makes our profession stronger, but it requires us also then to converge at a point at probably the postgraduate level, unless you start seeing universities put this in at the undergraduate level, and frankly, I'm not seeing that yet, where we are all learning the same basis that the profession requires, right? Somebody has to teach you the process. If you're a sociologist, nobody's teaching you design. But sociology is important because it transfers well into our process, as does architecture, as does content, as does graphic design, as does psychology. Other questions? I'm working myself into a sweat. That was a good question. No, I think it's yours, Andre. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So if there's no more questions, we'll call it for today. We can get together outside and just continue having this interesting conversations amongst us. Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you all for the invitation and for the space. And again, thank you for this School of Architecture for hosting this event. And hopefully we'll see each other soon. Have a good night.